Hi, welcome everybody. It's Peter Downs from the Inclusion Club here. It's a great pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Paul Oliver. Hello, Paul.
Hi Pete, how you going?
I'm good. I'm good, thanks. Now, Paul's the perfect man for this episode because Paul is currently manager of Play by the Rules, but he's also former communications manager for the Australian Human Rights Commission. So he's a communications professional, and so no better person really to talk about some of the issues we talk about in this episode. Paul, can you very quickly though just give us an insight into Play by the Rules, because I think that would be interesting for Inclusion Club people.
Yeah, sure, Pete. Play by the Rules it's hard to define whether it's a program, a campaign, an initiative. It's all of the above, but pretty much aimed at promoting safe, fair and inclusive sport in Australia, particularly at the grassroots level. So, that's a combination of all things. There's a website, there's media campaigns, there's tools and resources, everything aimed at promoting safe, fair and inclusive sport.
Yeah, I'll put a link to Play by the Rules, and it's really I recommend people checking it out. There's whole sections in there around disability discrimination and inclusion as well. So I'll put a link onto this page about Play by the Rules. Now, Paul, you're a communications professional, as I mentioned, and now with a human rights interest and a background. Now, it always amazes me that so many people with disability have their fundamental rights breached almost on a daily basis. Yet so many of these breaches go kind of seemingly unnoticed in many ways. They become part of the norm. Is this a situation partly the result of how we communicate about human rights?
Yeah, very much so. Particularly with that role at the Human Rights Commission, was just educating people about what is discrimination or what is harassment and those particular issues. And it doesn't have to be overt discrimination, which tend to be the issues that people may go to a next step to get a resolution with. It can be everyday things, and in relation to sport, that could be access to premises with your club, of having a ramp up into your club, or it could be inclusion policies as part of it for people with disability, and flexibility around those particular issues. But you're very much right. The norm is accepted of, particularly with sporting clubs, of a fear of introducing a range of these things for fear of making mistakes in those areas. So many won't do inclusive policies or do some of these changes because they fear they might get it wrong and the repercussions will be worse if they did nothing in the first place. So very much a lot of education and awareness for people of what is a discrimination issue.
And I'm guessing that kind of in those messages that simplicity rules okay. You know, the more simple you can get the basic message about this is not so scary, that kind of message really works.
Yeah, and that is the issue with human rights issues or discrimination issues, that they're very much tied up in international UN language, international declarations, those type of things. But the principles are very basic. You can't talk in that language of declarations or discrimination acts, those type of things. You've got to talk in everyday language, and particularly with sport. Those are fair play, sportsmanship, having a go, that type of stuff, which all translate to things that you're talking about in human rights legislation and declarations anyway.
And I think there's probably, you're probably very used to it, but there's probably quite a skill in translating that sort of stuff to a layperson's language in a way. The Bruce Maguire story, I want to touch on that one as we were talking about a bit before. That was really interesting, and people can see the video here because I met Bruce a few years ago, and he became the villain in that story simply for expecting and standing up for a basic human right. Now, this was partly the result of the way that human rights is communicated to the masses, as we've been discussing. How did he become the villain in that piece?
Yeah, it's funny. I work with Bruce at the Commission, and he's a lovely guy. And you expect with a whistleblower or someone who creates a case like that, to be a troublemaker or a rebel, but not at all. He was just standing up for something that wasn't right. And I think society tends to label people, who do stand up for their rights in any of those issues as a troublemaker first up. and would rather acquiesce with what's going on rather than stand up for change. And you see that with a lot of human rights issues. They are strong issues around racism, homophobia, disability issues. And it does take a strong character to actually make a stand on those. But you can see the results when someone does make a stand, and the change that results from that. And basically, it all stems back to that simple thing of not getting a fair go in an area of society.
Yeah, yeah, and although it took a couple of years out of Bruce's life to deal with all that shenanigans of the around 2000 and stuff, the end result was positive for everybody.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just finished reading a book called Beautiful Souls, and it's four different stories about ordinary people who'd shown the courage to risk their careers and sometimes risk their lives for standing up to a particular issue. All of those said at the end of the book that the personal expense that they copped from standing up for that issue was enormous. But all of them also said that they'd do it again. It was the right thing to do, and we're very happy with the resulting change from that.
Yeah, yeah, it's how society moves forward. I'll put a link on that. I'll put a link for that resource onto this episode as well, so I'll get that off you later on. Finally, think the videos in the Human Rights Commission when they produce the 20 years, 20 stories. Now they're very powerful case studies and how the average person can stand up for their rights. Now we've already talked a little bit about the messaging and education. What kind of do you think, if we're going to change this kind of fear around standing up for your rights, so more people can, one, recognize what their rights are, and two, not be afraid to take action to stand up for them?
Yeah, I think they're really clever, the 20 Years, 20 Stories series, documentaries, because they use modern contemporary ways of communicating through video. And from my time at the Human Rights Commission on a range of different projects, from the Bringing Them Home with the Stolen Generation, that was all about sharing stories. Same with there was one we did with the same sex, same entitlements, of same superannuation entitlements for same sex people. And that was all about, we actually got a sports person, Peter Fitzsimons, the writer, who knew nothing about this issue, but showed him, what was going on there, and that was his conclusion of it. It's just not right. So it was getting someone in society not aligned to the issue, but just, making that connection. And then that made it to the wider society connection, that if someone not involved could see this, well, perhaps the rest of society could as well. And we've done that for a range of the children in immigration detention, through videos and stories. And that's what I continue to do now with Play by the Rules. So whether it's videos up there with showing abusive parents at sporting events, or coaches abusing players, that type of thing, to show how silly it looks and the effects that has on kids in sport. So I think it's really about being contemporary, using social media, particularly these days, and videos to tell those stories. Human rights, telling their story in the past, has a tradition of using the dry UN fact sheets, that type of thing, the one-dimensional things, and you really need to make these stories live with people that are not involved with them. I found at the Human Rights Commission you're constantly trying to tell your message to the wider society, but it really ended up only going to 5 or 6%, and that was to the NGOs that were already involved with it, or lawyers that were involved with those issues. Sport for me really opened that up. With a background in sport, I could see straight away you're hitting 50% of the community. So if you can relay that human rights message around whether it's fair play or sportsmanship or inclusion in any of these issues, suddenly your market's opened up exponentially, and you can communicate those messages across.
Yeah, and you're right. The Human Rights Commission here in Australia do a fabulous job with those sorts of case studies and use of social media. They're all over the social media with those kind of messages and links and things like that. There are other good examples I know of around the world, and people watching this, I'm sure, will relate to it where they do similar, but it's really quite a powerful way these days to get messages out on a regular basis in a layperson's friendly format that people can see.
And the other side you alluded to before, Pete, was the making people aware not just of that issue, but what they can do if their rights are being breached in any of those areas. And all of those methods that they're using, it very much must also link over to the complaints process or information if a person does want to make a complaint, so that that doesn't seem like a scary or onerous process as well. And I think it's important to remember to use examples of people who have done that process and followed it through. There's some good ones of sexual harassment or discrimination cases that they show the full process and the outcome in the end for that. I think it's important people see that to know that there's support there and the process does work.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Okay, Paul, I'm going to cut the video there. Say thank you very much. We'll put links to those resources and play by the rules in this episode for people. But thank you very much, Paul, and we'll catch up with you soon.
No problems, Pete. Thank you.